Hello, everyone. I am Corey Andrew Powell, and this is Motivational Mondays. Today's guest is Victoria Song. Victoria works with billion-dollar company CEOs, tech founders, and even big celebrities like Cindy Crawford, one of my favorite supermodels of all time, a Forbes 30 under 30 venture capitalist, Yale University, and Harvard Business School alum. She's also the author of the new book, best-selling book, I should say, Wall Street Journal bestseller, Bending Reality, How to Make the Impossible Probable. So Victoria, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Hello, Corey. Thank you for that intro.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, that's your life. You are very impressive. So I'm either a slacker or I got to get out more because you've done a lot of stuff. But that does bring me to begin the conversation a little bit about, we just were talking a little offline before we started recording, and you've done all these amazing things, amazing accolades, and yet there was still something that drove you to write this book, which really is about sort of discovery still, even after accomplishment. So in your own words, share a little bit about the inspiration behind your book, Bending Reality, and how to make the impossible probable.
Going back a little bit, my inspiration to even become a coach. So when I left finance and tech, I realized that I was very fortunate at a young age. I think I entered VC when I was 23. So I was an investor, early stage companies. And at an early age, I was surrounded by very successful multi-billionaire kind of entrepreneurs. And one of the themes I noticed across the board at Yale, Harvard, and these success stories was that everyone felt successful on paper, but there was an emptiness and a void that I noticed they couldn't seem to fill. And it looked like they were almost searching in all the wrong places to fill this void within. And that is when I had my existential awakening and desire and passion to figure this puzzle out of, like, why are we all in this rat race together? And even those who've made it aren't happy or fulfilled, and they've generally cost them everything, whether it's their health or their friendships or their family. And it really felt like it was success at all cost. And that's what really inspired me to move into this capacity as a leadership coach. And what I help people with goes beyond just their executive leadership skills, but really looking at how can we make sure that you're creating a business that is sustainable and you're calm and confident running it, but you also have a life that you're excited to wake up to, and you're not escaping your life into your business, and you're not like a workaholic where you're avoiding kind of everything else and throwing yourself into work, which is what I grew up around. That was my family. That was what I witnessed around me and professionally. And that's why I became a coach, so I can support people on not just creating the success and impact they want, but also the joy and fulfillment that I believe all of us want all those things for. Like, we want all those things because we imagine we'll feel a certain way when we achieve them. But I think it's a little bit reversed.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. We're programmed, I would say, since we're born, that you're supposed to do X, Y, Z, and that's going to equal the perfect life. And it might be the white picket fence, and it might be in your case, we were talking the education. I mean, 2 Ivy League degrees. And I mean, who wouldn't think that's okay? Now the world's my oyster, everything's perfect. And yet there was still, something that felt unfulfilled. So why do you think you were discovering that as such a commonality between successful people? Is it societal pressure? Is it family pressure that we're putting on our people, or is it all the above? What do you think about that?
I think it's all of the above. And I think it starts, as you were saying, when we're kids and we're sort of trained to be more like this, less like that. You have to work hard and do homework and topics that you don't care about. And we sort of learn to associate learning and working hard with like boredom toward things that we don't even care about. And then we imagine that's what professional careers are like then. So then we bring that attitude toward the workplace, and we're like, well, nobody likes their job. It's just like doing homework. It's just like having to study for tests I don't care about. And so it's definitely a huge part of it. And my family was that way. And socially, I mean, it's all because they mean well, but in the process, we really disconnect from our true nature, our natural gifts. We tend to double down on our weaknesses instead of our strengths. Like, there's this quote of like, if your kid's really good at tennis but bad at math, hire them a tennis teacher, not a math tutor. But it's socially, we think we should double down on our weaknesses, but we would be so much happier and more successful even if we stop trying to strengthen our weaknesses and just actually double down on our gifts.
I love that. And in fact, you're the second person on the show, and I've done this for like 2 years now. You're the second person who actually has reiterated that, which I was fascinated by, because you're right. The natural inclination is, I don't know how to play the piano that well. My mom makes me practice it and I'm not really good at it, but I'm really good at this thing over here. But they're forcing me to increase my piano lessons or whatever the situation may be. And it was very like, we make the mistake of not excelling at things that we were already naturally inclined to be good at, as opposed to, we're kind of mediocre at something, not really enjoying it, and spending all that time trying to perfect it when you just leave that to someone else who excels in that.
Exactly. I think it's Einstein who had that quote of like, if a fish evaluated its intelligence by its ability to climb a tree, it would spend its whole life thinking it's an idiot. And that's exactly what your point is. Like, that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. And to use the fish analogy, I love the part in the book, and it's simple, but I was like, wow, when you mentioned how we go through life with a lens, and you made the analogy about a fish, right? Like a fish in water doesn't see the water.
No.
But and it's like the same thing that we do, where we put these lenses on and go through life with this kind of distorted sense of reality. So talk a little bit about that. I found that fascinating.
Yeah. So the book is called Bending Reality, because I believe that we're always bending our reality. It's just most of us are probably doing it unconsciously out of what we want. So moving it away from what we desire, because we have this contractive lens on, where the lens is like looking for the other shoe to drop. Fear-based, doubting, right? It's like whatever we kind of focus on expands. And so that lens distorts our reality out of our favor. Whereas if we have a lens, which I call the more expansive lens, which is when you're operating the state of being where you feel open and grateful and receptive to life and creative, this is the state that I help my clients make their default state. You start to have this lens where you're really open to all the possibilities that exist. And you start to, I believe, be able to bend reality in your favor. So bend the odds in your favor when you have this more expansive lens. And so hopefully by reading the book, you realize what lens you've had on, and then you can now consciously choose which lens you want to have.
Yeah. And again, with that, so many of those lenses are inflicted on us by other people.
Yes.
As I was reading the book, I realized how many times I thought, I didn't follow my own instinct because of XYZ. One of my favorite stories is the actress Taraji Henson decided to go to Hollywood at like 26 years old, and she had a 5-year-old son. And her family, everyone was like, girl, you are a Black woman, almost 30, with a 5-year-old. What are you going to do in Hollywood? Which is the land where sort of, quote, pretty white people go to become famous. Yeah. And that's how she said, well, that's fine. I appreciate your input, but I'm packing up my kid and I'm going to Hollywood. Fast forward to her being an Oscar nominated actress, one of the most celebrated. And she said, if you allow people to put their fears onto you, you will never grow. You'll stay. You'll be stifled. And that's very much what I get from what you're saying. Yeah,
because we are blank slates as children. Like when we're babies, we have no idea that this is scary or this is right or this is wrong. We're being told by our parents that like, this is how you see the world. This is how we see other people. This is how life's going to go. It's going to be hard. You're going to have to sacrifice a lot to succeed. There's all of this training that creates our belief system. And then that belief system we apply as our lens on reality. And then we bend our reality to be self-fulfilling of those beliefs. So a huge part of it is to excavate and remove all those beliefs that no longer serve you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. When it comes to like social issues, that applies. I mean, all the things that we are learned about prejudice and bias against others. Children do not have that at all.
No.
Until the parents or the grown-ups in the room get involved. And then hell breaks loose with, what the kid perceives the world to be.
Exactly.
Wow. That's amazing. When it comes to that too, I wonder how much of a correlation you feel there is between what seems in recent years to be this movement towards visualization and not putting out the negative thoughts, because by doing so, you're inviting more of that into your world versus focusing on what you do want, which will then invite more of that in abundance. Now, that's sort of like the element of the whole big thing, The Secret. That was a big thing a few years ago. And even like Abraham Hicks, who's more of a different, animal. But I mean, there seems to be a correlation. Do you see a similarity?
Yeah, I feel like my book is more nuanced because I believe that we actually create the reality from our conscious and our unconscious. So you might consciously be like, think positive, be grateful, let me focus on the positivity. But if subconsciously you have a fear of failure or a fear of visibility, or the truth is that you're afraid that people are going to laugh at you and judge you, and it's going to feel like that time you were bullied in middle school, subconsciously, you're going to create resistance to creating what you want. But you're going to be like, well, I don't know why I'm not getting what I want because I keep focusing on the positive. But if you go beneath the surface, the conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg. So most of the work that I do with my clients is what's in the subconscious. Like, what are the thoughts, feelings that are in the subconscious that are actually repelling your goals? And so let's feel your emotions and process and release all of those blocks. And as you see from my book, a huge part of my book is on how to process your emotions, the value of processing your emotion, so that you don't actually subconsciously block what you want because you think you're positively thinking, but deep down you're actually believing it's not possible for you.
That's a perfect segue because, very much like when I had a few months ago, I had the meditation guru Vishen Lakhiani on the show, and he's amazing with the Mind Valley brand, and his philosophy about meditation gets a little metaphysical, it gets a little bit more involved. It's not just like positive thoughts. It's about really understanding breath work, for example, which you also talk about as well. But when it comes to that idea, you also talk about I call it sort of metaphysical in a way, but you talk about the contraction versus expansion, which really goes right into what you just were talking about. So maybe I know it may be a bit more involved, but can you sort of explain the difference between contraction, expansion, and how they correlate?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can do this together, Corey. So if you imagine in this last week, last 7 days, what was an event that didn't go the way you wanted it to?
There were a couple.
Yeah. Okay. So when you tune into those events, what do you notice happens in your physical body? Like, what happens to your breathing?
Yeah. And just now saying what I just was thinking about, heart raced immediately, hands got clammy. It was like instant as I thought of it.
Totally. Yeah. So this is the state that is contraction that a lot of us don't realize we're living from and operating from this place, especially if you're an entrepreneur. The more uncertainty there is in your life, the more likely you're going to be operating from this place of contraction, right? So in this state where you just described, where your breathing was probably more shallow, your heart was racing, your hands were clammy, you're more likely to trigger your fight-flight response. And you get this tunnel vision on reality where instead of seeing all the possibilities, you focus on what can go wrong. Excuse me.
God bless you.
I'm allergic to contraction. No, I'm kidding.
You probably explained it like a million times. That's what you're probably allergic to. So sorry about that.
No, it's great. It's a huge framework in the book, so I'm happy to share it. So in this state, this is when we have our fear talking, our self-doubt, our worry, like worst case scenario plotting, impending doom generator. This is the state that contraction creates in our system. And there's all these thoughts that create contraction. There's all these feelings that create contraction. And then there's playing small and like lacking courage to take action and even freezing up that comes from contraction. Yeah. And then if I asked you, Corey, now to tune into the last week and feel into a moment that did go the way you wanted it to, what do you notice when you tune in?
Had some of those too. I felt immediately I was transported to that moment. I almost exhaled.
Yeah.
And especially I will share that moment was I had been trying to get to the beach all week and I just couldn't, and I was busy. And then I just finally at 5 o'clock just shut the laptop down and said, I am going to do this.
Yes.
and it was just everything I needed it to be. I stayed there for like 3 hours to almost 8 o'clock, just laying on the beach. So I immediately felt that when I thought of that moment.
Now. Okay. So I just saw your body kind of just like even relax and drop, like your shoulders dropped. Yeah. And then you said you had this exhale of like, I can finally let go, you know? Yeah. And I imagine this state too, you feel like your chest opening up, you feel open and surrendered, you feel maybe even happy. I see a smile on your face, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So this is a state that I call it expansion in the book. And I believe that this is what fundamentally is like the meta framework behind all the coaching tools out there is like, how can we get you into a place of expansion? Okay, well, gratitude practice helps. Thinking positive thoughts help. Going to yoga, doing breath work, all of these things. It's like, how do we get you to this expansive state so that we can start to create muscle memory of it, and then it becomes a default state from which you operate from. So that's really my work. So all of the tools and teachings I give my clients and the readers is how do you release contraction in your system, and then how do you access, stabilize, and even increase the level of expansion you can feel in your body? Because it's my belief that before we do this work, it's almost like we have this thermostat on what's normal. And anything more than that is like too good to be true. So we have like, this is how much time off I can take before I feel like restless. This is how much pleasure I can receive before I feel hedonistic and guilty. This is how much compliment I can receive before I deflect and say like, no, not me. You look amazing, right? So how much of a good thing can we actually let in? That's the other thing, is like, can we raise our upper limits on how much expansion we can let into our life?
Wow, that is amazing. And then I think, it's such a correlation between our professional lives and personal development is really what I'm getting from it too. It's almost like you almost like cannot be expected to be successful in other aspects of your life if you haven't grounded yourself in the personal, like, knowing who you are, what you represent, all of the above, right? Living in your authentic self. Even if that's a conflict, how would you ever be able to move forward? Because you're not even showing up as your actual self in many cases, right? So, so when it comes to that component, how does your dealing with corporations differ from when you're dealing with people who are like celebrities? I mean, are you using the sort of the same foundation and it just works across both boards?
Yeah, I would say that most professional challenges are, as to your point, personality issues and how that shows up in the workplace, right? So if you're someone who tends to be very controlling and impatient and triggered into fight or flight the moment something doesn't go the way you want it to, well, I can guess what kind of leader you might be at the workplace and what it might feel like to work for you on your team, right? So there's a lot of, well, let's do the inner work, to your point of like, what's the personal work that if we unlock this, will have infinite ripple effects in how you show up professionally. And also, if we are not authentic because we have a fear of being authentically seen and visible, we are afraid that people might reject us, we're going to play small, right? We're not going to be bold and make those courageous moves that are required sometimes for success. So these are all, I believe that the inner work is the amplifier. Like, I can give people tips on how to communicate and give you a one-pager on how to give feedback, but that's like, again, the tip of the iceberg. It's very tactical. It will help you just for this current circumstance you find yourself in. But if you want to create the quantum leap where it's like, wow, the moment I unlocked this fear of rejection, I became like an unstoppable force. I started putting myself out there. I started doing all the things I needed to get my business out there. And I started like creating more innovative ideas because I felt braver, bolder to put my ideas out there. And then that's the thing that creates the quantum leap, right? It's not like, let me give you 3 steps on how to do this better.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's no like magic wand for it. Bring, there it is. Now you have to do some of the work.
Yes.
Or do the work. And when it comes to corporations too, I do wonder, because there's a guest I had on the show who I think is absolutely wonderful. She's a co-anchor on the Morning Joe show. And she wrote a book called The Other, or Othered, I guess it was called. And she's Daniela Piera Bravo. And she's a Hispanic anchor on Morning Joe, and she talked about something very similarly to what you just said, but it's about it being even more amplified for people who are, quote, othered in a corporate environment. And so I can't help but to think, when you're talking to corporations about how to get over the hump and be more productive, I cannot imagine that diversity and inclusion is not in that conversation.
Yeah,
I could be wrong, but okay. So I had imagined, because that's when you really get the most, again, when people show up as their authentic self. And if you're not welcoming everyone to the table, how can that happen? So share a little bit about maybe the role that plays in the work you do.
Yeah. So I would say that a lot of people, mostly the other, but everyone seems to have a story of why they don't belong, and it often starts with the family system. So like, I don't relate to any of my parents, my family, my siblings were so different, or my parents weren't home. They were too busy for me. So I didn't really feel like I had that family experience. So absolutely, those of us who are othered feel that way. And I find that it's actually much more prevalent than you would imagine. People always have the reason why, like, even when they're in my coaching group containers, sometimes they're like, oh, everybody else here is like a really successful CEO, and I'm a salesperson at Salesforce, and I feel a little bit intimidated. I don't belong here. And then there's also the opposite problem where people show up and they're like, I'm kind of more successful than everyone here. So is this really the right room for me?
Right.
But people do have a tendency to, where we're all quite sensitive as is, to looking for evidence that we're not quite being accepted. Right. And then those of us who are, quote unquote, the other, like this woman you just described writing this book about that, it's even more the case because there's actually social reasons why we've been conditioned to see that we're not actually belong and we don't fit in and we're so different. So that's why I would say that even whether your company, wherever your company is on the spectrum of diversity, you need to think about how to make everyone feel like they belong, because it's actually a deep-seated fear we all have. And so the more companies can start to prioritize, okay, what does it look like to bring your whole self to the workplace? How do we make sure that bonding activities are not just like drinking, but that we're actually getting to know each other and connecting? Because I do find that when we hear each other speak, no matter where we come from, we realize like, oh, I can see myself in your story, and like there's more resonance. And when I feel like I can see myself in you, it makes it, in the times we disagree, easier to move through than kind of being black and white about it and being like, oh, of course you believe that because you're XYZ. But it's like, oh, let's bridge this understanding, because now I see you as more just like a human like me. So yeah, it absolutely is a big part of the conversation. And I feel like whether or not you self-identify as an other or not, you probably do have these deep-seated feelings of like, I'm not fully accepted, I don't fully belong here. And yeah, so that's a huge part of my work.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up, it could be for a myriad of reasons. Like, I mentioned ethnicity, but you're right. It could be like the social background. You may feel like everyone in the room, they have more of their tax bracket is bigger than yours. So they don't even have a reference, or you have no reference perhaps for things they're discussing just because of you've had limited access and they have had a different life. I mean, all those dynamics can play. And that's why it's important that the corporations or people in positions of being hiring managers or, in sort of a corporate environment, is something that they need to be aware of as they're looking to bring on more people to be more welcoming. I think that's a really, really great point. So also, I have a couple of notes here because I know you have like these specific lessons that you share in the book and you go through. And I thought maybe we can just tap into a couple or a few of them and just kind of dissect them a little bit. One is burnout. It's a big one. Because by the time so many people reach all those successful things we talked about, maybe it's like, okay, I'm going to get out of high school, go to college, I'm going to get my degree, I'm going to get my master's, I'm going to get a husband or wife, have kids, have house, and they're like 30 and they've done all that, and then they're burnt out already. I mean, I went to my first high school reunion, I should say, dating myself. Went to my first high school reunion and the kids were burnt out already. We weren't even 30 years old yet. I mean, seriously, I was talking to them, they were like so stressed. So I've seen that, but how do you reach your optimal performance without being burnt out?
Something I mentioned in Bending Reality is, as we talked about, this contractive fuel. So most people, without realizing it, are driven by this desire to prove something. So I'm smart enough, I'm good enough, like I'm going to once and for all of this business succeed, I'm successful, right? So there's this huge pressure put on like what this says about me and what this means about me. But as you can feel into it, can you feel how tight of a grip that is and like how contractive it feels to be running anything from that place? Yeah. And that is honestly where most people, right, that's driving the milestones, like let me get the house, let me get the marriage, whatever it is. And so most people I feel burn out because they haven't tapped into a more renewable, sustainable motivation, which is what I call an expansive fuel. And so expansive fuels look and sound like, well, what is your sense of purpose and your sense of life mission? Like, why does this matter to you? How is this good for you and good for the world, right? And so immediately when you feel a sense of purpose, can you feel that your heart kind of opens up and you feel more expansive when you feel like connected to a sense of mission?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And another thing that I talk about in the book is that's why it's so important to find the parts of your work that are in your zone of genius that almost feel like play for you. Just as like an engineer considers problem solving play, like they love problem solving, it's so fun for them, or an athlete loves the game, like it feels like play to be on the field. Like those are the things that you want to start to tap into. Like, well, what parts of my work feel like play for me? Because when we're playing, there's no discipline, willpower, motivation required. Like we don't have to convince ourselves to play. Like if there's effortless, renewable energy there to keep doing the work, and we can tap into play as a motivator. And then finally, the reason why we often say like, do what you love is because if you actually love the work that you're doing, the reason for the work is so much more expansive feeling in your body than like, what does this say about me if it works or doesn't work, right? So part of my work is also seeing what might be a contractive driver for my clients of why are they so attached to this business working right now, like, why can't they sleep at night? Like, what is creating unnecessary wind up in their nervous system? So, the burnout, I believe, is not just created from a contractive fuel, but it also comes from all the unnecessary, like second guessing myself, feeling afraid of uncertainty and the unknown, death grip on reality. Like, all of that is creating like this really tight nervous system. And a tight nervous system is the tight nervous system that ends up burning out and being exhausted because you're like completely depleted at every turn. Before you're 30, you're depleted.
Yeah. And it's high stress and anxiety and all the things that then can come with that can actually turn into actual health problems.
Yeah. Disease that becomes disease. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny, as you were saying that, for me, I was just thinking like, 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, podcasts were maybe new and no one knew what they were. But, I had always been a curious person asking strangers questions about their lives, and sort of inadvertently discovered that I liked talking to people. And for me to now have this as a career where I get to every week have wonderful guests on like yourself and talk to people, you're right, it doesn't feel like work. I mean, it feels like I'm just sort of these two things aligned, where I was aligned with something that allowed me to thrive in my element. And it happens to be work, but these dots connected, and it's very contenting work. I'm sharing, I'm letting people in the world understand more and learn more. So it's, I totally can speak to what you're saying. It's true. I don't feel like, I'm going to work. I feel like my job is important and I love it. It's very different.
Yeah. There's a mission and impact that you have, and it's fun for you.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's like therapy for me. Every Monday, I'm like, okay, I get to work out a lot of stuff in these conversations. So I love this one too. We just talked about this. This actually reiterates that. So we can find your unique zone of genius and live from it every day. So I just sort of gave you the segue to that one. So talk about that.
So you probably heard this concept of like, we have these 4 levels. The first level is the zone of incompetence, then the zone of competence, and then the zone of excellence, and then lastly, the zone of genius. And it's my belief, and what I help my clients and support them to do, is to move from the zone of excellence into the zone of genius. Because for those of us who are successful, high achieving, we often get stuck in the zone of excellence, because the zone of excellence is the part where we're good at this. We get paid well for it. We get a lot of accolades for it. But to your point, it still feels like work. So the thing that you're good at, that people are like, yeah, you're going to get promoted, we're going to pay you more. And it's like hard to say no to that, because you're like, gosh, like I'm really good at this thing, but like at the end of the day, it still feels like work to me. And that's where people get stuck, is the zone of excellence. Most of us are not staying hired in the zone of incompetence. Most people in the zone of competence realize that there's something else they could probably be better at, right? Zone of competence is like, I, could do this, but I'm not really good at it, but like I could figure it out. Zone of excellence is we're really great at it. So then zone of genius is where, as we talked about, it doesn't feel like work. It starts to feel like play and flow, and you like would love to do this. I often say this, which is like, honestly, even if I weren't getting paid to do this, I would still be doing this, right? It's like, let's get paid well to do what we love. But the truth is, like, I would do this anyway because I love it so much. And that's when you're in your zone of genius.
Yeah, I'm the same way, because it's so funny. Like when I'm not doing this, my partner and I went on I had to cover a hotel opening, like upstate New York. We'd never been there before. And so we're in Saranac, New York, and we check in. It's like, let's go check out the town. And we get to this little local bar, pub, a lot of artsy kids hanging out. And there's a girl at the bar, and she's like having the worst day of her life. And I'm like telling my partner, I'm like, oh, she's having a bad day. He was like, oh, here we go. He already knew I was going to turn into Oprah. And I went over to her. I was like, hey, you okay? And as I was talking to her, I began to tell her, well, what Stedman Graham would say about that. I interviewed him on a podcast recently. And I began to carry these lessons into the real world when I'm not getting paid to do so. It's just like, you're right. We tap into our true nature. And if we're lucky enough to turn that into a job, then it's a blessing. Now, I will ask you, though, that brings us back to the correlation of, do you think people are not finding that so easily because, to your earlier point, they're still focusing on
strengthening their weakness?
Right. And not identifying their strengths.
Yeah, I do feel it is like coming back to that fish metaphor, but in a different way. It's like if you were to tell a fish it's a good swimmer, it would look at you confused. You'd be like, what do you mean I'm a good
What does that mean?
swimmer? What does that
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
So we tend to overlook what comes naturally to us because we're taught, again, that you need to work hard, struggle, and sacrifice to be successful. So we're looking around for, well, what's the thing that I know I would really have to work so hard pushing a rock up the hill to succeed at? And then that's the thing I should go do. I should go push the rock up the hill. Because again, we're trained to look for what requires that like struggle and sacrifice. So I do feel a huge part of it is us not learning and being supported by our society and our parents and family system to double down on the things that come naturally to us. And there's all this fear, right, as well of like, well, can you make a living doing that? But to your point, there's so many people who are going against the odds and becoming really successful in spite of how rare that is in that industry. Because if you really tap into what you're naturally gifted at, you uncover a superpower. And I do feel that kind of like that movie Pixar. Do you remember that cute movie Soul?
I didn't see it. No, I know the film, but I didn't see it.
Yeah, it's a really sweet film that essentially says that each one of us comes to this earth already with these seeds of like dreams planted in our heart of things that we're already naturally gifted at. And we're here in the life experience just to like do things that light up those talents, whether it's music or athletics or whatever it is. And we already have it before we come down here. But then the question is, will you give yourself permission to let yourself follow what lights you up? You know, will you both activate it and then give yourself the permission and support to pursue it?
I love it. Wonderful words of wisdom from Victoria Song, author of this fabulous book, Bending Reality, How to Make the Impossible Probable. It's been a wonderful conversation, Victoria. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today here on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you, Corey. I loved your questions and I loved the conversation.